Marcus Cole had never imagined that he would one day stand in the halls of an alien palace, wearing armor made from metals that did not exist on Earth, and serving a queen who was not even human. But life had a funny way of taking strange turns, and Marcus had learned long ago to stop questioning where the universe decided to put him. He was a soldier once, back on Earth, fighting in wars that seemed so important at the time, but now felt like distant memories from another life when humanity finally reached the stars and discovered they were not alone. Everything changed. The Galactic Concord was a vast alliance of alien species, some friendly and some not so friendly. And humanity was the newest and smallest member of this great cosmic family at first. The aliens looked at humans with curiosity, and maybe a little bit of pity. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy, and they were certainly not the fastest or the smartest by alien standards. The Kreth were massive creatures with 4 arms who could tear through metal walls with their bare claws. The Velisi were thin and graceful beings who moved so fast that human eyes could barely track them. The Marvathi had brains 3 times the size of human brains and could solve problems that would take human scientists decades to figure out. So what could humans offer to a galaxy filled with such amazing creatures? The answer came from an unexpected place. Humans, it turned out, had a gift that no other species in the known galaxy possessed quite like they did. They called it many things: paranoia, hypervigilance, anxiety, or simply the feeling that something was wrong. For most of human history, this trait had been seen as a problem, something to be fixed or medicated away. But in the galaxy, among species who had evolved on peaceful worlds without predators, this human quirk became incredibly valuable. The Arthani were one such species. They were insectoid beings, tall and elegant, with shimmering chitin that came in colors of deep purple and royal blue. Their compound eyes could see in spectrums that humans could not even imagine, and their antennae could detect chemical signals and pheromones with perfect accuracy. They had built a great civilization, a dominion that spanned dozens of star systems, and they were proud of their logic and their reason. Queen Celiara was the ruler of the Arthani dominion, and she was everything her people admired: calm, rational, and precise in every action and word. She had ruled for nearly 40 cycles, which translated to about 60 Earth years. And in that time, she had brought peace and prosperity to her people. But peace, as Marcus knew all too well, often made people blind to danger. There had been 3 assassination attempts on the Queen in the past 2 cycles alone. 3 times, someone had tried to end her life, and 3 times, her guards had failed to see the threat until it was almost too late. The Arthani guards were loyal and brave. There was no question about that. They would die for their queen without hesitation. And their combat skills were impressive by any standard, but they had a weakness that they could not even recognize in themselves. They trusted too much in what they could see and measure. If their scanners showed no threat, then there was no threat. If their intelligence networks reported no conspiracy, then there was no conspiracy. They did not understand the value of suspicion, of that nagging feeling in the gut that something was simply not right. That was why Marcus Cole found himself walking through the crystalline halls of the Dominion Palace on a cold morning, his human eyes scanning every shadow and his human instincts screaming at him to stay alert. The Arthani High Council had decided, after much debate, to hire a human guard for the Queen. It was an unusual decision, and many in the court thought it was foolish. What could one small human do that an army of Arthani warriors could not? But the Queen herself had approved the appointment, and her word was law. Marcus remembered his first meeting with her, standing in the great throne room with its walls of living crystal that sang softly in harmonics. Beyond human hearing, she had studied him with those massive compound eyes, thousands of tiny lenses all focused on his face, reading him in ways he could not understand. "You are the human," she had said, her voice a strange and beautiful harmony of clicks and tones, translated by the device in his ear. "Yes, Your Majesty," he had replied, keeping his voice steady and his posture respectful. "They tell me your species sees danger everywhere, even when there is none to be found. That is true, Your Majesty. They say it is a flaw in your psychology, a remnant of your primitive past when you were hunted by predators on your home world. Some say that, Your Majesty," the Queen had tilted her great head, her antennae twitching with what he would later learn was curiosity. "And what do you say, human?" Marcus had thought about his answer for a long moment before speaking. "I say that my ancestors survived because they were afraid, Your Majesty, and I say that their fear lives on in me. And I say that sometimes fear is the only thing that keeps you alive when logic fails." The Queen had made a sound that his translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration, an interesting perspective, and perhaps one my own people lack. From that day forward, Marcus became part of the Queen's inner retinue, a position that brought him into the heart of Arthani power. The other guards did not like him. Cathrall, the chief of the Royal Guard, was a massive Arthani warrior with battle scars on his chitin and a proud bearing that spoke of decades of loyal service. He looked at Marcus the way a wolf might look at a small yapping dog, with annoyance and barely concealed contempt. "You are here because the council is afraid," Cathrall told him on his first day. "But do not think for a moment that you are needed, human, because we have protected our queen for generations without your kind, and we will continue to do so long after you are gone." Marcus did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with proud warriors was a waste of time. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "I am here to help in whatever way I can." "Commander." Cathrall made a clicking sound of dismissal and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing on the crystal floor. The court nobles were even less welcoming. They whispered about him in their strange chemical language, their pheromones carrying messages that his translator could only partially decode. They thought he was a curiosity, a primitive creature brought in like an exotic pet to amuse the Queen. Some of them laughed at his small stature and soft skin. Some of them wondered openly why a human was allowed in such sacred spaces. Marcus ignored them all. He was not here to make friends or to prove himself to aliens who would never accept him. Anyway, he was here to do a job. And that job was simple. Watch, listen, and keep the Queen alive. So that was exactly what he did every day. He walked the halls of the palace with his eyes open and his senses alert. He memorized the faces of every servant, every noble, every guard. He learned their patterns, their habits, their routines. He noted which doors were left open and which were always locked, which corridors were busy and which were strangely empty. And slowly, quietly, he began to see things that no one else seemed to notice, things that made his human instincts whisper warnings in the back of his mind, things that made him think that the danger to the Queen was far from over, and that the next assassination attempt might be the one that finally succeeded. Weeks passed in the Dominion Palace, and Marcus learned to read the rhythms of the alien court like a soldier learns to read a battlefield. Every morning began with the ritual of first light, when the Queen would emerge from her private chambers and receive the blessings of the sun through the great crystal dome above the throne room. Every afternoon brought audiences with nobles and merchants and diplomats from across the galaxy, each one seeking favor or fortune, or simply the honor of standing in the Queen's presence. Every evening ended with the communion of stars, when the Queen would retreat to her meditation chambers and the palace would fall into a hushed and respectful silence. Marcus watched it all with careful eyes, taking note of every detail and filing it away in his memory. He noticed that the Queen was a lonely figure despite being surrounded by hundreds of attendants and guards. Her advisors spoke to her with formal respect, but there was a distance in their words that spoke of duty rather than affection. Her guards protected her body with fierce dedication, but they did not know her mind or her heart. Only in rare moments, when she thought no one was watching, did Marcus catch glimpses of the person beneath the crown. He saw the way her antennae drooped with exhaustion after long days of audiences, saw the way her compound eyes lingered on the stars visible through the palace windows, as if she was dreaming of somewhere far away. He saw the weight of her position pressing down on her like a physical burden, and he understood, perhaps better than any alien could, what it meant to be trapped by responsibility. But Marcus was not here to be the Queen's friend. He was here to be her guardian. And so he focused on his true purpose, finding the threats that others could not see. It started with small things, little details that seemed meaningless on their own, but formed a troubling pattern when put together. There was a servant named Vethri, who worked in the kitchens and sometimes brought refreshments to the Queen's private meetings. Marcus noticed that Vethri's scent glands pulsed with anxiety whenever he was near the Queen's chambers, a subtle chemical signal that the other Arthani seemed to ignore, or perhaps could not detect over the normal background smells of the palace. When Marcus asked Kethrol about the servant, the guard commander dismissed his concerns with a wave of his armored claw. Vethri has served in this palace for 20 cycles, Kethrol said, his translator rendering his clicks into flat mechanical words, and his family has been loyal to the crown for generations. So your suspicion is nothing but human paranoia, which is exactly what we expected from your kind. Marcus did not argue, but he kept watching Vethri, noting that the servant had begun taking different routes through the palace in recent days, routes that took him past security checkpoints and communication nodes. Then there was Trade Minister Sothrol, a sleek and polished noble with chitin, the color of burnished gold, and a voice like honey dripping from a spoon. Sothrol was charming and well-liked in the court, known for his clever negotiations and his ability to bring profitable deals to the Dominion. But Marcus noticed something strange about him. Trade Minister carried the faint chemical residue of off-world communication devices, the kind that were not registered with palace security and could send encrypted messages to unknown recipients. When Marcus reported this observation to the security office, they thanked him politely and did nothing. Trade Minister Sothral communicates with many off-world parties as part of his duties, the security officer explained with barely hidden impatience. And we have investigated his communications before and found nothing suspicious. So please do not waste our time with such reports. Marcus nodded and left the office. But he added Sothral to his mental list of people who needed watching. The list grew longer with each passing day. There was a group of nobles from a distant province who had arrived at court recently, claiming to seek the Queen's favor for a new mining operation in their territory. They were polite and proper in every way, but they asked too many questions about the Queen's schedule and her security arrangements. Questions that went beyond simple curiosity. There was a new maintenance worker in the engineering section, a quiet Arthani with nervous movements who had been assigned to work on the palace's environmental systems. His credentials checked out perfectly, but Marcus saw him once in a restricted corridor where he had no business being, and when their eyes met, the worker looked away too quickly. There was a visiting diplomat from the Velisi Confederacy who spent an unusual amount of time near the palace's outer walls, always with a datapad in hand, always looking at something that Marcus could not quite identify. Each of these observations went into Marcus's reports, and each report was met with the same polite dismissal. The Arthani security apparatus was efficient and well-organized, but it operated on evidence and logic, on things that could be measured and proven. They had no framework for understanding the human way of seeing threats, the ability to sense danger from fragments and shadows and the spaces between. Fax Cathrall summoned Marcus to his office one evening after yet another report about suspicious behavior. The guard commander sat behind a desk made of polished crystal, his scarred chitin gleaming in the soft light, his compound eyes fixed on Marcus with an expression that mixed frustration and grudging respect. "You have submitted 17 security reports in the past 10 days, Cathrall said, his voice flat and controlled. "Yes, Commander. None of them have contained actionable intelligence, and none of them have led to any arrests or discoveries. I understand, Commander, and yet you continue to file them, wasting the time of my officers and cluttering our security databases with human imaginings." Marcus stood at attention, his face calm despite the criticism. "I file the reports because that is my duty, Commander, and because I believe that one day, one of those reports will be the one that saves the Queen's life." Cathrall made a clicking sound and his translator rendered his bitter laughter. "You see assassins in every shadow, human, and that is your species' curse. The same hyperactive fear response that made your ancestors jump at every rustling leaf and every distant howl. That fear kept my ancestors alive, Commander, and it will drive you mad if you let it control you. Because the truth is that most shadows are empty and most noises are harmless. And if you spend your life waiting for danger that never comes, you will waste your life on nothing." Marcus met the commander's gaze without flinching. "And if I stop watching for one moment, and that moment is when the danger finally comes, then the Queen will die, and I will have failed in my duty." Cathrall was silent for a long moment, his antennae twitching with emotions that Marcus could not read. "You truly believe that something is wrong, do you not?" "I know something is wrong, Commander, but I cannot prove it yet." "Then prove it, human, because until you do, your reports are nothing but noise." Marcus left the commander's office and walked back to his quarters through the darkened halls of the palace. He passed servants and guards, who barely glanced at him, their alien faces unreadable, their alien minds thinking alien thoughts. He was alone here in a way that went beyond simple isolation. He was a different kind of creature, seeing the world through different eyes, and no one around him could understand what he saw or why he saw it. But Marcus had been alone before, and he had learned that loneliness was a small price to pay for survival. So he went back to his quarters and he reviewed his notes and he planned his next steps. He would watch the servant Vethri more closely. He would find a way to track Trade Minister South Rawls' communications. He would dig into the backgrounds of the suspicious nobles and the nervous maintenance worker and the curious diplomat. He would build his case piece by piece, evidence by evidence, until even the logic-obsessed Arthani could not ignore the truth. Somewhere in this palace, someone was planning to kill the Queen, and Marcus Cole was going to find them before they could succeed, because that was what humans did. That was what humans had always done. They watched the darkness and waited for the predator to show itself. And when it did, they were ready. Marcus lay down on his narrow bed and closed his eyes. But even in the silence of his quarters, his mind kept working, kept searching, kept looking for the pattern that would reveal the truth. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was filled with dreams of shadows moving in crystalline halls, of danger lurking just beyond the edge of vision, of a queen who did not know how close death had come. And somewhere in those dreams, a voice whispered that time was running out. The announcement came 3 weeks before the event, delivered by the royal herald in the great throne room with all the ceremony and grandeur that the Arthani loved so much. The grand alignment was approaching, the most sacred ceremony in the Arthani calendar, a time when the stars of their ancestral home system would align in a pattern that happened only once every 50 cycles. And on that night, Queen Celiara would enter the Chamber of Stars, alone to commune with the light of her ancestors and receive their blessing for another generation of ruling was a beautiful tradition. Steeped in thousands of years of history and meaning, it was also, Marcus realized with a cold knot forming in his stomach, the perfect opportunity for an assassination. The Chamber of Stars was a sacred space at the heart of the palace. A domed room with walls of crystal that focused the light of distant stars into patterns of breathtaking beauty during the grand alignment. The queen would stand at the center of the chamber for 1 full hour, bathed in the light of the ancestral stars. While no guards were permitted within 100 meters of the chamber, no weapons allowed, no surveillance devices, no protection of any kind, tradition demanded that the queen face the ancestors alone, vulnerable and trusting as a sign of her faith in the divine order of the universe. For thousands of years, this tradition had been honored without incident. The Arthemy had no concept of desecrating such a sacred moment with violence, and no assassin had ever dared to strike during the grand alignment. But Marcus was not Arthani, and he knew that traditions could be broken by those desperate or ruthless enough to do so. 3 days before the ceremony, the pieces began to fall into place. The servant Vethri disappeared from the palace, leaving behind only a brief message claiming family illness in a distant province. When Marcus tried to trace his whereabouts, he found that the transport records had been altered, the data corrupted in ways that suggested deliberate sabotage. Raid Minister Sothral had quietly changed his schedule for the night of the grand alignment, placing himself in the palace's central operations hub rather than at his usual observation post in the Noble Gallery. When Marcus checked the operations hub protocols, he found that it housed the control systems for the Chamber of Stars, including the crystal focusing arrays and the environmental regulators. Small shipments had been arriving at the palace for the past 2 weeks, logged as ceremonial supplies for the grand alignment celebration, but when Marcus managed to get a look at the actual cargo manifests, he found that the mass distributions did not match the official records, with several containers showing weights far higher than their listed contents. Should have produced something heavy had been smuggled into the palace, and Marcus had no idea what it was or where it had been hidden. He tried to get answers through official channels, requested an audience with the queen to share his concerns directly, but his request was denied by the royal chamberlain, who explained that Her Majesty was in seclusion preparing for the sacred ceremony and could not be disturbed for trivial matters. He demanded that Kethral delay the ceremony until a proper security investigation could be conducted, but the guard commander refused outright, his compound eyes flashing with anger at the suggestion. "You would have me delay the most sacred tradition of our people because of your human imaginings," Kethral said, his voice sharp with contempt. "And you would have me tell the queen that she cannot commune with her ancestors because a small nervous creature from a primitive world feels uneasy. So no, human, I will not delay the ceremony. Something is wrong, Commander, and I can feel it in every bone of my body." "Then your bones are liars, because our security systems show no threats and our intelligence networks report no conspiracies, and the ceremony will proceed as planned." Marcus tried one more time, filing a formal security objection with the High Council itself, laying out all his evidence and all his suspicions in a document that took him most of the night to write. The council reviewed his objection and rejected it within hours, noting that his concerns were based on speculation rather than evidence, and that they could not justify disrupting a sacred ceremony. On such flimsy grounds, he was running out of time and running out of options on the morning of the ceremony. Marcus made a decision that would either save the queen's life or end his career in disgrace. Positioned himself in the private corridor that the queen would use to travel from her chambers to the meditation room where she would prepare for the ritual when her entourage appeared, a procession of attendants and guards moving with solemn purpose. Marcus stepped out of an alcove and dropped to one knee in the Arthani. Gesture of urgent supplication, the guards reacted instantly, drawing weapons and moving to protect their queen, their bodies forming a wall of armored chitin between Marcus and their monarch. Ithral was among them, his face twisted with fury at this breach of protocol. What is the meaning of this? Human, the commander demanded, his hand on his weapon. You will explain yourself or you will be arrested. Marcus stayed on his knee, his head bowed, his voice calm despite the weapons pointed at him. I beg an audience with Her Majesty. On a matter of life and death, you were denied an audience, and you have no right to accost the Queen in her private corridors. I know, Commander, and I accept whatever punishment you choose to give me. But first I must speak. The Queen's voice cut through the tension. Melodic and commanding, let him speak. Kethral hesitated, his antennae twitching with conflicting impulses. But he could not disobey a direct order from his monarch. The guards parted slightly, allowing the Queen to step forward until she stood before Marcus, her compound eyes studying him with an intensity that made him feel naked and exposed. Rise, human, and tell me what is so urgent that you would risk disgrace and imprisonment to speak with me. Marcus rose to his feet but kept his eyes lowered in respect. Your Majesty, I believe you will die today if you enter the Chamber of Stars. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy with shock, and something that might have been far Kethral made a sound of outrage. But the Queen raised a forelimb to silence him. That is a serious accusation, and do you have evidence to support it? Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the knowledge that everything depended on what he said next. No, Your Majesty, I do not have evidence in the way your people understand evidence. But I have patterns, and I have observations, and I have the feeling that has kept my species alive since we were prey on a hostile world. Patterns and feelings are not evidence. I know, Your Majesty, but the servant Vethri has disappeared, and his records have been tampered with. And Trade Minister Sothral has positioned himself near the chamber's control systems. And unidentified cargo has been smuggled into the palace under false manifests. And there are too many coincidences for them all to be coincidences. The Queen was silent for a long moment, her antennae moving slowly as she processed his words. My guards tell me that all of these matters have been investigated and found to be harmless. With respect, Your Majesty, your guards investigate with logic and evidence. And they cannot see what I see, because they were not built to see it. And what were you built to see, human? Marcus met her gaze directly for the first time, knowing that he was breaking every protocol of Arthani court etiquette, knowing that he might be executed for the presumption, but not caring because the Queen's life mattered more than his own. I was built to see danger, Your Majesty, to feel it in my gut and in my bones. To know when something is wrong even when I cannot explain why. And I am telling you now that something is very wrong about this ceremony, and if you enter that chamber tonight, you will not come out alive. The Queen studied him for what felt like an eternity, her alien mind working through calculations and considerations that he could not begin to imagine. Then she spoke, and her words surprised everyone present, including Marcus himself. I believe you. Kethral made a sound of protest, but the Queen silenced him with a gesture. I believe that you believe what you are saying, human, and I believe that your instincts are telling you something that my own guards cannot see. So I will not cancel the ceremony because that would be impossible. But I will allow you 1 hour before the ritual to inspect the Chamber of Stars personally. And if you find nothing, you will accept the consequences of your actions today. Marcus bowed deeply, relief and determination flooding through him in equal measure. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet, human, because if you are wrong, you will spend the rest of your life in an Arthani prison. And our prisons are not kind to soft-skinned creatures. I understand. Your Majesty, the queen turned and walked away, her entourage following in her wake, leaving Marcus alone in the corridor with only Kethro for company. The guard commander stared at him with naked hatred in his compound eyes. 1 hour? Human. And when you find nothing, I will personally escort you to your cell. Marcus nodded. But he barely heard the words. He had 1 hour to find what he was looking for. 1 hour to prove that his human instincts were not just primitive paranoia. 1 hour to save the life of an alien queen who had taken a chance on a nervous creature from a primitive world. He could not afford to fail. The Chamber of Stars was the most beautiful room Marcus had ever seen. And he had seen many wonders since leaving Earth. The dome ceiling rose high above his head, made entirely of crystal that had been grown over centuries to exact specifications. Each facet cut and polished to focus light from specific stars in the sky above the walls were covered in ancient Arthani script. Prayers and blessings written in a language that predated the Dominion itself, glowing faintly with bioluminescent ink that pulsed in slow rhythms like a heartbeat. The floor was a mosaic of precious stones from 100 worlds, arranged in patterns that told the story of the Arthani people from their first steps on their home world to their expansion across the galaxy. It was a profound spiritual significance. And Marcus felt like an intruder as he stepped through the heavy doors and into the sacred space. Thrall stood at the entrance with a squad of guards, their weapons ready, their eyes fixed on Marcus with a mixture of contempt and barely suppressed hope that he would find nothing and prove himself a fool. Marcus ignored them and began his inspection. Started with the obvious places, the corners and shadows where an assassin might hide, the ventilation shafts where poison gas might be introduced, the floor panels where explosives might be concealed. He found nothing. He moved to the walls, running his hands along the ancient stone, looking for hidden compartments or unusual textures that might indicate tampering. He found nothing. He examined the doors and windows, checking for mechanisms that might seal the chamber or release deadly substances. He found nothing. Half an hour passed, and Marcus felt the cold grip of doubt beginning to close around his heart. What if he was wrong? What if his human instincts had finally betrayed him, seeing danger where none existed, crying wolf one time too many? What if he was about to spend the rest of his life rotting in an alien prison because he could not control his own paranoid imagination? He pushed the doubt aside and forced himself to think, if he were planning to assassinate the queen during the Grand Alignment, how would he do it? He could not hide in the chamber because it would be thoroughly cleaned and blessed before the ceremony. He could not plant explosives because the chamber was too sacred to risk damaging, and the blast would need to be massive to overcome the crystal structural integrity. He could not use conventional poison because the queen would be wearing ceremonial garments that filtered the air she breathed. So what was left? Marcus looked up at the ceiling, at the crystalline dome that would focus the light of the ancestral stars onto the queen during the ceremony. The light itself, that was the answer. The ceremony was all about the light, the sacred illumination from stars that had shone on the Arthani home world for millions of years. If you wanted to kill the queen during the Grand Alignment without leaving any trace, you would use the light itself as your weapon. Marcus climbed onto one of the ceremonial platforms that lined the walls, reaching up toward the crystal focusing array that hung from the center of the dome. The array was a masterwork of Arthani engineering, a collection of precisely cut crystals that gathered light from the dome and directed it to a single point in the center of the chamber where the queen would stand. He pulled out the small analyzer that he carried with him at all times, a human-made device that could detect chemical residues and material compositions. He ran it over the surface of the crystals, and at first it showed nothing unusual, just pure crystalline silicates and trace elements consistent with Arthani. manufacturing processes, but then he noticed something strange. One section of the array was slightly different from the others. The crystals just a fraction of a shade darker. The surface texture just slightly rougher. He focused his analyzer on that section, and the readings changed dramatically. There was something woven into the crystal matrix. Microscopic tubes filled with a chemical compound that his analyzer identified as Zerethian bloom. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Zerethian bloom was one of the most deadly neurotoxins in the known galaxy, specifically engineered to target species with compound nervous systems like the Arthaniid. Was colorless, odorless, and completely undetectable to Arthani senses when exposed to concentrated light of specific wavelengths. It would vaporize and become airborne, killing any Arthani who breathed it within seconds. Crystalline Dome was designed to focus light of exactly those wavelengths during the grand alignment when the ceremony began and the ancestral stars aligned. Their light would pass through the contaminated crystals and activate the Zerethian bloom, releasing a cloud of invisible death directly onto the queen as she stood in the center of the dust chamber. It was brilliant and horrible at the same time. No one would even know what had happened. The queen would simply collapse, and the Arthani physicians would conclude that she had died from some natural cause, perhaps the stress of the ceremony or an undiagnosed medical condition. The assassins would have committed the perfect murder, using the sacred light of the ancestors as their weapon. Marcus scrambled down from the platform and ran toward the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. "I found it," he shouted, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. There is Zerethian bloom woven into the focusing array, and when the light hits it, it will kill the queen. Kethril stared at him for a long moment, his compound eyes unreadable, his antennae frozen in place. Then he moved, barking orders to his guards in rapid Arthani, sending them racing into the chamber with detection equipment and containment gear. The next hours were a blur of activity. Technicians carefully removed the contaminated crystals from the array, sealing them in hazardous material containers. Security officers fanned out across the palace, searching for anyone who might have had access to the focusing array intelligence. Agents began tracing the supply chains for Zerethian bloom, looking for any connection to known criminal organizations or hostile foreign powers. And at the center of it all, Trade Minister Sothral was arrested in the palace operations hub, his datapad seized and his communications decrypted by specialists who found evidence of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the Dominion's borders. The Trade Minister broke quickly under interrogation, revealing that he was part of a faction of nobles who wanted to overthrow Queen Celiara and install a puppet monarch who would serve their commercial interests. They had been funded by external powers, corporations and governments who wanted access to Arthani resources without having to negotiate with a strong and independent ruler. The plan had been simple: kill the queen during the grand alignment, make it look like a natural death, and then manipulate the succession to place their chosen candidate on the throne. The nervous servant Vethri had been recruited to smuggle the Zerethian bloom into the palace, and he had fled when he realized that the human guard was getting too close to the truth. The mysterious cargo shipments had contained the specialized crystals that were woven with the toxin, manufactured off-world and brought to the palace under false pretenses, and Trade Minister Sothral had used his position in the operations hub to ensure that the contaminated crystals were installed in the focusing array without anyone noticing. It was a conspiracy that had been months in the making, carefully planned and expertly executed, and it had been stopped by a single human guard who could not prove anything but refused to ignore the feeling in his gut that something was. Ronkithral found Marcus sitting alone in a quiet corridor after the arrests were complete, staring at the wall with exhausted eyes. The guard commander stood before him in silence for a long moment, his proud posture diminished, his antennae drooping with emotions that Marcus could not quite identify. "How did you know?" "Human," Kethril finally asked, his voice quiet and troubled. "Our scanners detected nothing. Our intelligence networks heard no whispers. Our security systems showed no anomalies." "So how did you see what we could not see?" Marcus shook his head slowly, too tired for anything but honesty. "I did not know, Commander, and I could not prove anything. But I felt it, and I could not ignore what I felt. You trusted instinct over evidence. I trusted that the absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. Because something was wrong and I could sense it, even when I could not measure it." Kethril was silent again, processing this information in his logical Arthani mind. "My people have built a great civilization on reason and evidence," he said finally. "And we believe that truth can only be found through careful observation and rigorous analysis. But today, I learned that there are other kinds of truth, truth that cannot be measured or proven, truths that live in the instincts of creatures who evolved under different stars." Marcus looked up at the guard commander, surprised by the words. "Does this mean you no longer think I am a paranoid primitive?" Kethril made a sound that his translator interpreted as rueful laughter. "I still think you are paranoid, human, but I no longer think the paranoia is a weakness. And I believe that the Queen owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid." Marcus smiled wearily and leaned his head back against the wall. "The Queen does not owe me anything, Commander, because I was just doing my job." "Then you do your job very well, human. And I am grateful that you were here to do it today." With those words, Kethril turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his exhaustion. He had saved the Queen. He had proven himself. But as he sat in that quiet corridor, all he could think about was how close it had been. How easily the assassins might have succeeded if he had doubted Asterisk. 3 days after the failed assassination, Marcus received a summons to the Queen's private garden. It was a place that no off-worlder had ever been permitted to enter. A sanctuary at the heart of the palace where the Queen could escape the pressures of rule and find a moment of peace among living things. When Marcus arrived, he found himself standing in a wonderland of alien beauty. Bioluminescent flowers painted the air in soft blues and greens, their petals glowing with inner light that pulsed in gentle rhythm. Trees with crystalline bark rose toward a transparent ceiling that showed the stars above, their branches heavy with fruit that chimed softly in the artificial breeze. Floor was covered in soft moss that felt like velvet beneath his feet, and the air was filled with scents that his human nose could barely process. Sweet and strange and somehow comforting, Queen Soyara stood at the center of the garden, her royal robes exchanged for simpler garments that made her look less like a monarch and more like an ordinary person seeking solitude. Her compound eyes watched Marcus approach, and for the first time since he had arrived at the palace, he did not see the weight of the crown in her gaze. "Thank you for coming, Marcus Cole." It was the first time she had used his full name, the first time she had spoken to him as something other than a servant or a guard. "Thank you for inviting me, Your Majesty." She made a clicking sound that his translator interpreted as gentle amusement. "We are alone here, and you may call me Selyara if you wish, though I understand that humans find informality with royalty to be uncomfortable." Marcus nodded, not quite ready to call the ruler of an interstellar dominion by her first name. "I prefer to maintain proper respect." "Your Majesty." "As you wish." She turned and walked deeper into the garden, and Marcus followed, his eyes taking in the alien wonders around him, while his instincts automatically cataloged possible threats and exits. Old habits died hard. "My people believe in the perfection of logic," the Queen said, a voice soft and thoughtful. "And we have built our civilization on the foundations of reason and evidence and the measurable universe, believing that these tools would protect us from all dangers." She paused beside a fountain that flowed with liquid light, her antennae dipping toward the glowing surface. We thought this made us superior to species like yours. Species that still carry the fears and instincts of their primitive ancestors. Species that cannot separate emotion from thought or feeling from fact. Marcus said nothing, sensing that the Queen was working towards something important, but we were wrong. She continued. Or perhaps not wrong, but incomplete, because there are truths that logic cannot find and dangers that evidence cannot reveal. And my own guards, with all their training and technology, could not see what you saw. She turned to face him, her compound eyes reflecting the bioluminescent glow of the garden. You saved my life with nothing but suspicion and the courage to act on it. And I have been thinking about what that means, not just for me, but for my people and for the galaxy as a whole. I was only doing my duty. Your Majesty, no, you were doing something more than duty, because duty would have told you to file your reports and accept the judgment of your superiors. But instead you risked your career and your freedom to warn me of a danger that you could not prove existed. And that took something beyond duty. Marcus considered her words carefully. On Earth, we have a saying, trust your gut. And it means that sometimes you have to listen to your instincts, even when your mind tells you that you are being foolish. Because those instincts are the wisdom of countless generations distilled into a feeling that rises from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. And where does this wisdom come from? From fear, Your Majesty. From 200,000 years of being hunted by creatures faster and stronger and more deadly than us. From generations of ancestors who survived because they listened to the voice that whispered danger when everything seemed safe. From the terrible truth that the ones who ignored that voice did not live long enough to pass on their genes. The Queen was silent for a long moment, her antennae twitching with what Marcus had learned to recognize as deep contemplation. So your species evolved under the shadow of predators. And that shadow shaped your minds in ways that we cannot understand. Yes, Your Majesty, and we have spent most of our history trying to overcome that shadow. Trying to be more rational and less fearful, trying to silence the voice that sees danger in every shadow. And yet, that voice saved my life. Marcus nodded slowly. Perhaps being afraid of the dark is not a weakness. Your Majesty, and perhaps the universe is more dangerous than species like yours can imagine. And perhaps there is value in having guardians who remember what it is like to be prey. The Queen extended a forelimb toward him, and Marcus recognized the gesture from his studies of Arthani culture. It was the gesture of deep respect, the gesture that equals offered to each other, the gesture that acknowledged worth and honor in the recipient. He had never seen it offered to an off-worlder before. You will remain as my guardian. Marcus Cole, the Queen said, her voice formal but warm. Not as a hired curiosity or a foreign mercenary, but as a trusted protector and advisor. And let the galaxy see that humanity's affliction may be its greatest gift. Marcus bowed deeply, emotion tightening his throat in ways he had not expected. I am honored, Your Majesty, and I am grateful. Marcus Cole, more grateful than you can know. The news spread quickly through the Galactic Concord. The human guard who had saved the Arthani Queen with nothing but instinct and stubborn vigilance became the subject of fascination and debate among the great powers of the Galax and Sekilistes wrote papers on the phenomenon they called human hypervigilance, analyzing the evolutionary pressures that had shaped the human mind into such an effective threat detection. System military strategists studied human patterns of threat assessment, trying to understand how a species could sense danger before any evidence of that danger existed. Noble houses and corporate councils began requesting human guards for their most important personnel, recognizing that there was value in having protectors who could see what others could not. And humanity, the newest and smallest member of the Galactic Concord, found itself suddenly valued for something that it had always considered a flaw. Other species might be stronger or faster or smarter, but humans were afraid in ways that no other species could match. And that fear made them vigilant in ways that pure logic could never achieve. Marcus Cole remained at the Arthani court, serving as the Queen's personal guardian and eventually becoming the head of a new security division dedicated to what the Arthani began calling intuitive threat assessment. He trained other human guards and worked with Arthani security officers to combine human instincts with Arthani technology, creating a protection system that was more effective than either approach alone. He never forgot where he came from or what had made him valuable. He never stopped watching the shadows or listening to the whisper of warning that rose from his gut when something was not right, and he never stopped being grateful for the gift that his ancestors had passed down to him across 200,000 years of fear and survival. Years later, when historians wrote about the event that changed the galaxy's perception of humanity, they focused on the political implications and the strategic consequences and the shift in interstellar power dynamics. But Marcus Cole knew that the truth was simpler than all of that. He was just a human doing what humans had always done, watching for the predator in the darkness. And this time, the predator had not been fast enough. That was the human way. That was what had kept his species alive through ice ages and predators and wars and plagues and all the countless dangers that had threatened to extinguish the fragile flame of human existence. And now, among the stars, surrounded by species who had never known what it was like to be hunted, that ancient gift had found new purpose. Marcus stood on a balcony overlooking the crystal spires of the Dominion capital, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in colors that had no names in any human language. Somewhere behind him, Queen Celiara was meeting with her advisors, protected by guards who had learned to value the human perspective. Somewhere out in the galaxy, other threats were gathering, other conspiracies were forming, other dangers were waiting to emerge from the shadows, and Marcus Cole would be ready for them, because that was what humans did. That was what humans had always done, and that was what humans would continue to do for as long as the stars burned in the sky above.